Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources you send us, dig into them, and pull out the key insights.
Yep. For you, the listener who wants to, get that deep understanding quickly, maybe get those aha moments, but without getting totally swamped by info.
Exactly. And today we're tackling a big one from Japanese history, Oda Nobunaga. We've got excerpts from a YouTube lecture transcript you sent in.
And the core question is, was Nobunaga the revolutionary figure we often think he was?
Right. So our mission here is to trace how his image changed over time. From his own era, the Sengoku period, right up to today.
And figure out what forces shape those different perceptions. It's going to be interesting.
Okay, so let's start with today. When we think Nobunaga now, it's often like this revolutionary guy, right? Challenging the old powers of the court, the Ashikaga shogunate.
Yeah, that's the standard view. Like in Professor Fujita Tatsuo's book, Honji no Hen, you see Nobunaga the reformer clashing with a more conservative Akechi Mitsuhide.
Reformer versus traditionalist, got it.
But that view wasn't always the case. If you go back, especially the Edo period, things look quite different.
Oh, really? So he wasn't always seen that way?
Not at all. Actually, during the Edo period, he wasn't nearly as popular as, say, Hideyoshi.
Hideyoshi really captured the public imagination then, didn't he?
He absolutely did. And when Edo period writers looked at Nobunaga, like in the Ozhan Shinchoki, well, it was a bit of a mixed review.
Mixed. How so?
Well, they praised his bravery, sure, his ambition, his eye for talent, but, and this is key for understanding the Edo perspective, they criticized him heavily through a Confucian lens.
Confucian, so like morals and governance.
Exactly. They thought he focused too much on military might, not enough on ruling properly. They saw him as cold to his retainers, didn't listen to advice. And the conclusion in Hoan Shinchoki was basically that his downfall, Hanchiji, was his own fault, a lack of righteousness.
Wow. So military success wasn't enough for them. Virtue mattered more.
Definitely. Virtue and proper governance were paramount in their view.
Okay, so that doesn't sound like a revolutionary hero. And what about Hoshiyama Iji's Seizan Iji? That's linked to Mitokomon, right?
Yeah, connected to those popular folktales. And there, the idea is pretty similar. Nobunaga lacked virtue, so boom, betrayal.
But isn't that just looking back, knowing he was betrayed, applying ethics after the fact?
That's a really good point. Hindsight bias is huge here. Were they just fitting the events to their ethical framework? Probably, yeah.
And then there's Arai Hakuseki, his Tokushi Yoron. He apparently really went after Nobunaga.
Oh, Hakuseki did not hold back. He painted Nobunaga as cruel, power-mad, using deceit, violence, especially that whole situation with Ashikaga Yoshiaki.
Right.
Hakuseki basically argued that getting betrayed by Mitsuhide, his grandson's supposed downfall,
Yeah.
it was all just deserts, karma, essentially.
And he contrasted Nobunaga with Tokugawa Ieyasu.
Yeah, very deliberately. Nobunaga was the negative example. Bad character attracts bad followers. Ieyasu naturally was the positive model.
Sounds like typical Tokugawa-era propaganda, maybe, elevating their own founder.
Well, Hakuseki was writing deep within the Tokugawa period. Yeah. There was definitely an interest in legitimizing the current regime. It shows how politics shapes history writing.
Definitely. Okay, what about the Ethon Taikoki, the book that made Hideyoshi so popular? How did Nobunaga come across there?
It's interesting. Similar praise to Hoan Shinchoki for ambition, judging character.
Yeah.
But it also stressed his, rigid sense of justice. Hated wrongdoing.
That's always a but.
But also unforgiving. Held grudges for ages. The Sasenaramasa case gets brought up as an example of that. So still complex, still not simple.
Not the perfect hero. And this book led to kabuki plays, where Nobunaga was the villain.
Pretty much. On stage, as Oda Haranaga, he was often the tyrant. And Mitsuhi's rebellion, that was framed as loyalty to the imperial court against the tyrant Nobunaga.
Wow, so the popular image was really quite negative for a long time.
Yeah, even into the Meiji era, in a world heroes ranking, Nobunaga ranked surprisingly low, like below Date Masamune. Hideyoshi was way more popular still.
Okay, so this image of Nobunaga, the revolutionary, it wasn't the main view for centuries. When did that actually start to change?
The big shift really comes with Tokutomi Soho. His massive work, Kinsei Nihon Kokumin Shi, A History of Early Modern Japan. He's the key figure here.
Soho, he was a journalist, right? Became quite pro-war later on.
That's him. And he fundamentally reinterpreted Nobunaga. It really shows how historical figures get remade to fit later times.
So how did he counter those earlier criticisms, like Hakunseki saying Nobunaga used, what was it, firepower, deceit, and violence?
Soho tackled that head-on. He argued Nobunaga didn't rise through dodgy means, but through genuine ability, real strength. He reframed him as capable, not just manipulative.
Okay, a total flip. What about the lack of virtue, the harshness to retainers that Ozo Hoen mentioned?
Soho spun that too. He said Nobunaga's strictness wasn't a flaw, it was fairness, meritocracy. He even called him a practitioner of democracy for promoting based on talent, not status.
Wow, practitioner of democracy. That sounds very Meiji Restoration, doesn't it? Equality, merit.
Absolutely. Soros was consciously linking Nobunaga to Meiji ideals. And he didn't stop there. He brought in Nobunaga's supposed continental ambitions.
Based on missionary accounts.
Yeah, interpreting those accounts, Soho suggested Nobunaga had plans beyond Japan. He saw Hideyoshi's Korea campaigns as, well, positive steps in that direction, even though they failed.
Kind of like precursors to Japan's own later expansionism.
Exactly. So I felt Nobunaga represented a moment when Japan could have engaged more with the world, but that got shut down by the failed campaigns and Tokugawa isolation.
So Nobunaga became this visionary figure, almost an early imperialist.
Soho literally called him an unconscious executor of imperialism. And back then, that was seen positively national strength, progress. He praised Nobunaga's policies for enriching the country, strengthening the military Fukoku Kyushu.
So not just a warlord, but a nation builder with foresight.
Pretty much. And Soho's final punchline is powerful. He calls Nobunaga the most suitable heavenly rebel to break down the old society and create a new one. That's where the revolutionary image really solidifies in historical writing.
Heavenly rebel. That's quite a statement.
Yeah.
Okay, so Soho establishes this revolutionary Nobunaga. Did academics pick up on this?
Yes, they did. Look at Tanaka Yoshinari's Oda Dashi lectures from Tokyo University. It's basically an academic stamp of approval on the revolutionary idea.
And what did Tanaka focus on?
Tanaka stressed Nobunaga's unique ability to just smash the old system, but also his innovative talent for building something new. Revolutionary progress, in Tanaka's view.
What specific things did he point to as revolutionary?
Well, military reforms using firearms effectively, those supposed ironclad ships, though the ironclad part is probably exaggerated.
Okay, what else?
Abolishing the Ashikaga shogunate. Tanaka saw that as huge, ending 400 years of military rule, intending to back the emperor directly to unify Japan. That itself was revolutionary.
And kicking out the shogun, Ashikaga Yoshiaki. How did Tanaka frame that?
Not as disloyalty, but as punishment for Yoshiaki disrespecting the emperor. So Nobunaga becomes the emperor's champion.
Interesting spin. Now, what about Okuno Takahiro, another big name? Did he agree?
Okuno's views are fascinating because they changed. His 1944 book, Oda Nobunaga, written during World War II, it's very different from his later work.
How so? What was the wartime view?
In 44, he portrayed Nobunaga as building a modern state, driven by this pure ideal of supporting the emperor to end the Sengoku chaos. He even explicitly linked Nobunaga's goals to the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere in the postscript.
Wow, okay. Very tied to the politics of the time. And later.
By 1965, in Nobunaga to Hideyoshi, the picture is, well, more complex. Nobunaga is seen using imperial traditions, yeah, but more strategically for his own political goals in that shift from early to late feudalism.
So less idealistic emperor champion, more pragmatic politician using the tools available.
Exactly, a much more nuanced take, seeing him leveraging institutions for power rather than being purely driven by imperial loyalty. Shows how interpretations evolve, doesn't it?
Yeah. It really does. Okay, so this revolutionary image is strong, but maybe we need to scrutinize his actual policies more, like land reform. Was he really progressive there?
That's a really good area to question. We often think of Hideyoshi's Taiko Kenchi, those big standardized land surveys, as marking the shift to early modern Japan. But Nobunaga's own approach was actually pretty hesitant, not very consistent.
Hesitant, inconsistent. Doesn't sound very revolutionary.
Not really. He didn't impose one single system for measuring land value. Sometimes he used Katadaka value based on money. Other times Kokodaka value based on rice yield. Depends on the region.
So he just used whatever system was already there.
Pretty much. It suggests he wasn't fundamentally overturning existing land rights, more like adapting to local customs.
How did that compare to other daimyo? Were others more systematic?
Yeah, if you look at the Goshus in the Kanto region, they actually had a more unified system for surveys and assigning land decades earlier. Much more systematic.
So what was Nobunaga's focus then, if not systematic reform?
It seems his main focus was just rewarding his guys with newly conquered land. He was always fighting, always expanding, so doling out territory was probably priority number one.
Keeping the troops happy with spoils of war.
Basically, he only started getting more interested in systematic surveys later, after big wins like Nagashino. And even then, he delegated to guys like Hideyoshi and Mitsuhide.
Which led to regional variations, right? Different methods.
Exactly. Things like Sashidashi Kenshi versus Dreri Kenshi. So again, less centralized, less top-down revolutionary than you might think. More pragmatic, maybe reactive.
Okay, so land policy. More pragmatic than revolutionary. What about his army? The idea of the professional soldiers, heini bunri, separation of warriors and farmers. Did he pioneer that?
That's another popular image that needs a closer look. Especially early on, there's not much solid evidence for a complete separation.
So not a fully professional standing army from day one.
Probably not. Remember, he relied heavily on alliances, like with Tokugawa Ieyasu. That points to a less centralized command than a purely professional force would have.
And as he expanded, he just absorbed local forces.
Seems likely. He took in existing forces, probably with their old structures and privileges intact. A full-time professional army is expensive, probably not feasible while he was still consolidating power.
Makes sense. Were any parts of his army more professional?
His personal guard, the Umawari Shu, the guys always with him on campaign, they were likely more detached from farming. There's that story in the Shinchuchuki about him making them bring their families to his castle town.
Right, to prevent fires and stuff. Suggests they weren't living back on their farms.
Exactly. But as historian Ikigami Susumu notes, other daimyo did that too, concentrating guards in castle towns. It wasn't unique to Nobunaga.
So maybe a trend towards professionalism, especially at the core, but not a sudden, widespread revolution in army structure early on.
Seems that way. More gradual, probably driven by the sheer amount of fighting he did.
Okay. Let's talk about Sasanarimasa getting dismissed, and that kanju, the written reprimand. What does that tell us about Nobunaga's leadership?
The Sasanarimasa incident. It's revealing. Nobunaga basically chewed him out for not achieving enough during the Ishiyama-Honganji siege, compared to other top guys.
And accused him of hoarding wealth instead of building up his forces.
Yeah, exactly. Not recruiting enough retainers, not investing in his military strength.
And the usual take is this just shows how insanely demanding and unforgiving Nobunaga was.
That's the classic interpretation. High standards, quick to punish failure. But historian Ikegami Hiroko has a different angle.
Oh, what's her take?
She suggests maybe the criticism shows Nobunaga didn't have clear, preset standards for military service based on land holdings. Like there were no defined quotas.
Interesting. So it wasn't that Narimasa failed to meet a known target, but maybe the target wasn't clear in the first place.
Could be. Fujimoto Masayuki's research backs this up a bit. He found that other clans, like Takeda and Ashoji, had detailed rules about military obligations based on land. But for the Oda clan, not so much evidence of that kind of detailed regulation.
So the Oda system was more ad hoc. Nobunaga just judged performance after the fact.
Possibly. More subjective evaluation, which leads to that provocative idea. Was the Oda clan like a black company?
Oh, what? Like an exploitative workplace?
Yeah, where expectations are unclear, evaluations are subjective, and everyone's under intense pressure to impress the boss or risk getting cut.
That pressure might explain why his army was so effective. Fierce competition.
Could be. But maybe not a fair or sustainable system. High pressure, but lacking clear rules.
That puts a whole different light on his leadership. Okay, final big topic. The Sanshiki Suyin issue. Those potential high court appointments for Nobunaga in 1582. That's confusing stuff.
It really is. The whole question of whether Nobunaga might be appointed Udaijin, Kanpaku, or even Shogun. It hinges a lot on interpreting Kaji Harutoyo's diary, the Harutoyo Nikki.
Right, because the diary mentions a conversation between Harutoyo, the court guy, and Murai Sakatsu, Nobunaga's man, in Kyoto. But it's fuzzy on who suggested these appointments.
Exactly. And the use of the honorific Raru is key. Traditionally, it's thought to refer to the emperor or an imperial prince, suggesting the court offered the positions.
But Tatsubana Kishiko argued the Raru could also apply to Murai Sadakatsu.
Yes. Her theory is that maybe Sadakatsu, representing Nobunaga, proposed the appointments, which implies Nobunaga was putting pressure on the court.
And that feeds into the theory that the court was behind his assassination.
That's how it's been used, yeah.
Yeah.
To support the imperial court mastermind theory.
But other historians disagree, right?
They do. One big issue is, why did Nobunaga seem hesitant to accept the title of Shogun when it was offered shortly after? If he was pushing for high office, why hesitate?
Good point.
And Hori Shinichi argued that if Nobunaga really wanted a specific job, the proposal would likely have been specific. Nobunaga wants to be kanpaku, not just Udaijin kanpaku or shugum. That's pretty vague for a power play.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like someone demanding a promotion, so what's a more likely read of that conversation?
Well, maybe Morai Sadakatsu was just testing the waters, sounding out Hiratoyo. Nobunaga had resigned as Udaijin. He had no court rank at that moment. So Sadakatsu might have been seeing which high office the court might offer and which one Nobunaga might actually accept.
Kind of like informal negotiations. And why would the court want to give him a high office?
Well, money, for one.
Yeah.
Nobunaga was bankrolling them, pretty much. Giving him a rank might create a sense of obligation, keep the funds flowing.
Ah, okay. Financial reasons.
Plus, remember, Nobunaga himself often seemed kind of indifferent to court ranks anyway.
So the idea that he was about to usurp the emperor's authority by taking one of these posts, probably overblown.
Seems unlikely. Even as Udaijin, Kanpaku, or Shujugo appointed by the emperor, he's still technically a subject. The whole court feared Nobunaga would become emperor theory seems pretty shaky based on this.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive really unpacked a lot. It's clear the Nobunaga we think we know isn't the only Nobunaga there's been. That revolutionary label is way more complicated.
Absolutely. That's the main thing. His image has shifted dramatically depending on who was writing and when. It wasn't static at all. It tells us so much about how history is written and rewritten.
Yeah, seeing all these different takes, the Edo criticisms, Soho's rebranding, the academic debates, it definitely gives you a richer picture than just revolutionary or tyrant.
It makes you think about which portrayal feels most convincing now and why. What influences our own view?
Definitely. And it leaves us with that final thought for you, the listener, with all these contradictions, all these changing views. What would a truly objective picture of Oda Nobunaga even look like? Is that even possible when we look back through time?